10 times in the Authorized, that's King James, 14 times in the NIV, the little phrase, in the eyes of the Lord, shows up. And I want to run through some of those with you. Turn to 1 Kings. The first one's in chapter 11 and verse 6. And I want you to think about how God looks on life. We look on it like, oh, I'm doing real well. You know, I'm still employed and I'm healthy, and oh, I don't feel very well. I just lost my job. Oh, now I feel really well because I just got some good news. Oh, now I don't feel very well. And we just run along, and we basically are looking at life in these little tiny ups and downs. And God looks at a life in its entirety. And when he looks at it, he just has one-word descriptions of our life. Good or bad. I thought that's very interesting. Good or bad. Not almost good and not real bad, just good or bad. And it's an interesting concept that we need to kind of grasp and live for what will make him say good. It says in verse 6 of chapter 11 of 1 Kings, and Solomon did evil, that's bad, in the sight of the Lord. Empros then. You know what that means? In front of the face of the Lord. In fact, the Lord's table is a takeoff, because of the unleavened bread and everything that we use, from the tabernacle in the temple. And the temple had the table of the face, or the showbread. And what that meant is, it was a table of bread that they set out in the old-fashioned tabernacle and in the Israelite kingdom time, and they would just put those loaves of bread there, the showbread, and we always read that and we think, showbread, who are they showing it to? You know, what's it there for? And what it was is, it was a time when God was on one side of the table and the priest was on the other side of the table, and it was like they were meeting at the table, and they were face to face in front of that bread. And God says, you live your whole life in prosthene, in front of my face. He says, and I'm watching. Okay, let's look at the second one, chapter 14, verse 22. Now notice the first one was an individual, Solomon. King Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord. Now, the second reference is 14:22. Judah, that's an entire kingdom, a nation. And the whole nation did evil in the sight of the Lord, and they provoked him to jealousy. Remember, God is jealous. You ever been jealous? You ever dated someone and someone else dated them and you went, oh. You know, you were jealous because, or did someone ever get something you wanted and you were jealous? Jealousy has a good side because God, it says, I am jealous. That's one of his names. One of his eternal character revelations to us is he is jealous. God is jealous. Now, he's not jealous because he says, you got something I don't have. He says, everything belongs to me and you took it. And I'm jealous for that and I want it. And I want your attention. And I want your obedience. And I want you to make me the priority. And if you don't, he's jealous. And it is very upsetting. And it says that it did evil, and they provoked him to jealousy with their sins which they committed more than all their fathers had done. See, God was very, very jealous for them. He says, you belong to me. Now think of the New Testament. For you are what? Bought with a price. Therefore glorify God with your body, which is his. See, God's jealous. We belong to him. I mean, just as much in the marriage relationship, two people commit themselves for life to one another to exclusively, not only physically, but also emotionally and mentally, to be totally committed to faithfulness to one another. They are not to be thinking about others. They are not to have emotional attachments and any physical attachments to anybody else. They are supposed to have a total singleness toward one another. God says, when you got saved, you became my bride. That's what we are. And what it is he's saying, you are all going to be united with me sometime in heaven. The marriage celebration is going to be up there. Until that, you're engaged to me and you can't date anybody else. I'm jealous. Well, they did. They were dating. And you say, well, what do you mean by dating? Well, what did they do? Verse 23, they built for themselves high places. What are those things? Well, those are kind of spiritual helps. They thought, well, this will help me. I'm going to go up in a high place, burn some incense, and some of it will be to God and some of it will be to other gods. But we just, it's kind of this religious aura that people have in America. They have a bunny foot and they have a little image and they wear something around their neck and they go to church and they hope it'll all pan out. God says, that provokes me. I'm the only one you're supposed to worship. Not only high places, but they had wooden images on every hill, under every green tree. That had to do with immorality. And they're also perverted persons in the land. Perverted? These are the homosexuals. God calls them that in the Scriptures. Perverted. And so there was a laxity morally and a laxity religious and spiritually. And God says he didn't like that in his sight. Look at chapter 15 and verse 5. Here's another one. And because David did what was right. Remember one word, evil or right, good or bad. Because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, and prostin in front of his face, and he didn't turn aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Now, wouldn't that be nice, that if we only blew it once in life? David, except in one matter, never turned aside from. Now, that doesn't mean he never sinned. It meant that the continual direction of his life was toward the Lord. Now, along the way, he made mistakes. He was a very emotional person. That's why we have all the Psalms. He was a very energetic person. He got a lot done. But only in the case of Uriah, murdering him, stealing his wife, lying about it, and all that, did he get out of following the Lord. He willfully stepped away from the Lord. But God says, in spite of him willfully stepping out, his whole direction was good. Isn't that nice? God doesn't say you blow it once, you're out. He says, even though he sinned grievously, he still was good in my sight. In verse 11, another one, and he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. That's Asa, as his father David had done. Chapter 15, verse 26. And it says, Nadab did evil in the sight of the Lord. He walked in the way of his father, and in his sin by which he had made Israel to sin. Look at verse 34. Here's another one. And Baasha did evil in the sight of the Lord, and he walked in the ways of Jeroboam in his sin by which he had made Israel to sin. Now, if we went through all of them, we could see that God assesses our life of how it panned out, because the entire life was lived in his sight. Now, if we played up on our projector screen, this was our life for the last 168 hours. I mean, if you could see what God saw, how would we have done? Was our direction, as it said in 15:5, David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn aside from anything God commanded him. Have you turned aside this week from anything he commanded you? He said, seek me first. And you know, there's a great verse in the Psalms that says this, I'll not find a place for my head until, in other words, to sleep, until I found a place for you, God, in my life. And I was telling the elders last night, I said, you know what? I think I've brushed my teeth almost every night since my mother taught me that, unless I was catatonic or dead or I'd lost my toothbrush. I mean, I can't hardly go to sleep at night unless I brush my teeth. Does anybody tell me to do that? I mean, do I have to have a daily planner? Does someone have to remind me and hold me accountable? No, I just do it because I want to do it and I need to do it. Do you spend time every day with the Lord? Or do you have to have someone call you or remind you? Do you have to have a checkoff thing? Does someone have to keep harping on it? And do you have to feel guilty because you don't do it? Or have you made it a part of your life? That's what he's saying. And he's saying that he didn't turn aside. And God commanded us that we are to be continually nourished from him. And anytime we live without nourishment from him, we're living in our own strength, and it doesn't please him. He wants us to live in his strength. And that's what it means to live in the sight of the Lord or the sight of God. This expression is repeated those 14 times in this book, and you can read the rest of them. We all need to ponder the theme of this book, and I really believe the theme of this book is in the sight of God. Because it's just, all these men are assessed how they lived, and some of them did great stuff. They built public works projects, and some of them really helped the economy, and some of them really did a lot of great stuff for Israel. But God says their hearts were evil in his sight. And that's something we need to learn, how we look in God's sight.